Hello, Herlaters. It's Erin Foley back in the booth talking women's sports. And I'm going to need everyone to go to your garage, put on your bike helmet, and get ready to become obsessed with women's cycling. I actually technically don't have a garage or a bike helmet, but I did take a spin class this morning to get ready for this interview. I am fired up. My guest today is Kathryn Bertine. Okay, she's a former pro cyclist, author, activist, and documentary filmmaker. She's done so much to put women's cycling on the map. It's incredible. And after listening to this episode, you will be hooked. Also, full disclosure, I am not a cyclist. I'm not really great on things with wheels like roller skates and skateboards and bikes. My dad would always say to me growing up, like, Erin, you really need to stick to sports where your feet are on the ground, which was good advice considering that I was face planting night and day. But I'm telling you, I watched cycling in the Olympics for the first time, followed by last week's women's Tour de France, and it is so exciting to watch. And the coolest thing, which you're going to hear, is that Kathryn provides this great insight of the history of the sport, the discrimination that women have faced since day one, along with her own story, which is so compelling. And also, I just want to take a quick second to recommend her cycling documentary, Half the Road, which you can rent on iTunes. It's a great companion piece to the podcast. Like our conversation kind of just literally scratched the surface, but the doc is like the full deep dive, and I loved it. So check that out. Okay, let's do this. Let's jump in. You're going to love Kathryn. You know, the real trick here, because I'm not a professional journalist, you are, is that how am I going to keep this podcast to less than 7 hours? Your personal story is insane. And then we're just going to, I don't know, touch upon the history of women's cycling. So that is a huge feat in itself. But I have 8,000 questions, but let's just jump right in with how all of this started for you personally, because on your bio, and I know a little bit about you, is like, ESPN reporter, and then I'm watching your documentary Half the Road, which we will talk about, and I'm like, wait, she's also a cyclist. She's a professional cyclist. So please tell me about that journey.
Oh man, I have to say, Erin, it was probably the strangest intro into sport that I had. Well, I should backstory that I grew up playing all sorts of different sports. So it wasn't necessarily that getting into cycling was my first time being an athlete. I'd done all sorts of stuff, figure skating as a kid, rowing in college, triathlon. But where the whole transition here changed into cycling was that I was working for ESPN, and they offered me what I would consider the assignment of a lifetime. This is back in 2006, and they said, "Hey, we want to know what it takes to get to the Olympic Games in this modern day and age." And for modern, that meant the upcoming 2008 Olympics, which were in Beijing. And the idea was they wanted me to try to get to the Olympics as an athlete. And here I am thinking like, oh, they want me to write about somebody going to the Olympics. And they're like, no, you're the guinea pig. So I had this 2-year column with ESPN on trying to get to the Olympics. And that became a book. But spoiler alert, I'll jump right to it. I found cycling. I'd been in triathlon, and of the three disciplines of swim, bike, and run, the strongest for me was cycling. So I said, okay, I'm going to pursue cycling, see how far I can get. And yeah, spoiler alert, long story short, I didn't make it to the games in like 18 months of being on a bike. Right.
Is that
And I think that's a
possible?
beautiful thing. Right. Yeah. If you're perhaps superhuman and genetically gifted and you have all sorts of, yeah, superhuman powers, maybe. But what I loved about that assignment, what it really proved was that, like, no, you can't just walk into the Olympics. And I think there's that common misconception that there are some sports that are quote unquote easy. So I tried a bunch, but settling in with cycling, I was like, wow, this sport is hard. But I also fell in love with it. So when the assignment ended, what was crazy was that even though I didn't qualify for the games, I became remarkably close. And I was also hooked. I loved the sport. I had no idea I was going to feel that passionately about road cycling. And it grabbed my soul. So I was like, okay, the assignment's done, but I'm in love with cycling. I'm going to keep going. I want to see if I can get to the professional level. And if I can, wouldn't it be amazing to get to the ability where I could someday race the Tour de France? So of course I start Googling, only to find that there is no Tour de France. And again, this is back now, we're like 2008, 2009. I'm like, that's insane. Why don't we have a Tour de France? Was there ever a Tour de France for women? So all these journalism questions are buzzing through my brain. And the research is turning out absolutely no good reason why we don't. But I did note that there was a women's Tour de France. So that's a little bit about how I got into cycling, and then how it just kept going, despite not having ESPN to fund my dreams from 2009 onward. I was hooked. I was hooked.
Okay, quick follow-up question. You like briefly skim over the part that you got remarkably close to
Oh, did I
to
skim?
going. You're just like, well, I was an ESPN reporter, sitting on the behind the desk, and then I got remarkably close to going to the Olympics for cycling, which is obviously mind-boggling. But in that journey, was the whole sort of premise of the assignment like, oh, I can, it's absolutely impossible. Like, were the ESP, where your boss is like, holy crap, you almost made it to the Olympics?
Oh, yeah. In fact, the whole assignment was really set up to fail. They wanted
Right?
to watch me
Okay.
struggle along the way because, oh, struggle is fun,
Sure.
for readers. And they assumed that I would never come anywhere near close to qualifying for the games. And to condense the story of what happened with cycling was that I was strong from other sports that I had done, and the last thing I want to do is toot my own horn and say, oh, I was some great, fantastic athlete. But I was a really strong athlete. I was a good, solid athlete. And what I took into cycling were all those years of skating and running and triathlon and rowing. And you might think that those sports have nothing in common, but if you think about the leg power and the core power that you get from rowing, from triathlon, from running, and from skating, it all transferred really beautifully into cycling. It's so quad dominant and core dominant. And that's what I brought with me in the cycling assignment. That what I didn't know, of course, was all of the intricacies and the nuances that go along with learning a sport like cycling, which I'm sure we'll talk about. It's like a chess game. It's not just that the fastest person goes from point A to point B and that's the winner. There are all these other factors, which we'll dive into. Those were tricky to learn in a year and a half, let alone a lifetime. But to keep it on the brief side, for sure, what was so interesting that I learned along the way was how very different and antiquated the cycling rules and regulations were compared to how progressive other sports seem to be, especially on the women's side. So to give you a few examples, the fact that, okay, there was no Tour de France for women, and this is back in 2009-ish. I'm doing all the research about that. I'm like, where to go? Was there ever? But I also noticed along the way during my journey that the women were not invited to the majority of races that the men had. And the ones that we did get to go to, the women had like half the distance that the men had. And of course, on top of all of that, prize money, oh my gosh, it was like pennies on the dollar, and even though we know that that's not new to women's sports, a lot of sports are fighting for those equalities. It was so incredibly drastic in cycling that it made no sense to me why these things were that way. So when I finished the ESPN assignment, I had all of these lingering questions that still needed answering. And that kind of launched me into, unsuspectingly, it launched me into an activism role to try to figure out how can we right these wrongs in the sport.
Okay. This is what I mean. My head's going to blow off because I have 7,000 follow-up questions. All right. Let's put a pin in the activism role because
Okay.
which is, I'm so excited to dive into. And just for me and for listeners who are not hardcore cyclist fans, like when we started talking, I just naturally assumed that there was a Tour de France for women. I was blown away that there wasn't. I mean,
Yeah.
and I know women's sports, we've come a long way, so slow, just like, pulling, going up a hill. But it was kind of mind boggling that it was just an assumption. The history itself of the Tour de France feminine, and I don't speak French, so I know terrible accent, is just fascinating. So can you just give us, your version, not your version, the version of of this, uphill battle for women just to be able to cycle is kind of mind-boggling.
I love giving the abbreviated history of this sport on the women's side. It's pretty fascinating how many ebbs and flows and progress and then regression there were. So there are and have been 4 renditions of the Tour de France Femme, as it's now called. So going back, the very first one was in 1955. And actually, before I even bring that up, I should say that the Tour de France has been around 124 years. I love that it started in 1900 because then it makes the addition and the math very easy for me. I can be like, oh, it's 124 years old. And it sounds so smart, but it's really just the year plus 100. So here we are, right? 2014, or sorry, 2024. And we've had it for roughly 124 years, except for a few years during the World Wars. It went on pause, understandably. So now, fast forward, there had not been any women in the early years. The first women's race was in 1955. And this was actually one of those set up to fail propositions where the race director thought women are never going to be able to do the Tour de France. And he gave the women 5 days in 1955, opposed to the 18 to 21 days that the men have routinely had since the beginning of the Tour de France. And so the race director gives the women 5 days. And not only do they thrive, but they complete the entire thing. And the first winner was a woman named Millie Robinson from the UK. And I think what happened was those women scared the pants off these
Yeah.
race directors. They didn't fail. And rather than the race directors saying, okay, we're going to bring this back in 1956, they did the opposite. They canned it. They're like, whoa, that's a little too close for comfort. These women are strong and talented. We have to never have them back again.
Unreal.
So it is. It's totally unreal. But it's so important that we know that that was the first edition in 55. And then fast forward, it's another 30 years. It wasn't until 1984 that Tour de France Feminine returned, this time for 5 consecutive years. So actually 84 through 1989. And this was amazing. Now the women were racing 18 stages, and they had a shorter course than the men, but not because the race director didn't believe that they couldn't do it, but because they would have the men and women race on the same days. So they shortened the women's race just so they could allow it to take place either just before or just after the men's race that day. And it worked. It went incredibly well. Teams that were represented there were not trade teams, but national teams. And there were, from all over Europe, I believe Australia was in there, North America was represented. So it was pretty amazing that these women went 18 stages, back-to-back days, doing the same things that the men could do. And then in 1989, it went away. And we have to pause here to tell people that the owners of the Tour de France is an organization called ASO, which stands for Amaury Sports Organization. They own the title rights to the Tour de France, right? So when 1989 rolls around and the tour is gaining a lot more international experience and also a lot more TV coverage. So the TV rights are discussed with ASO, and the broadcast is starting to go worldwide. Rather than include the women's race in these broadcasting rights, they just totally canned the women's race, like only focusing on the men, and that there could be maybe more fanfare or more tourism associated. And let's just get rid of the women and focus on the men. And that was a huge mistake. And a bunch of the women, I would say all the women, their feathers were pretty ruffled from that. And they said, well, fine, you know what? We'll create our own Tour de France. And ASO said, nope, you won't. You can't use the name Tour de France. That's our name. Good luck and best wishes. So that, in my terms, but I think other people's terms as well, like that's banning the women from the tour. They're not allowed to use the name, not allowed to continue. They're just scrapped and, tossed to the wind. What happened next was a bunch of women found kind of an in-between style race in France, the Grand Boucle, they called it. I can't remember what boucle means, but it was not the same time of year, not the same distance, not the same course. Of course, it was going to be a very challenging race, but it just wasn't the Tour de France. It wasn't the name that the world knew. So it went away. and 1990 rolls around, there's no more women at the tour. And this is, now we're jumping ahead basically 24, 25 years. And this is where I kind of stepped in to help get the party started again. But when I was doing this research in 2009, I'm like, wait, there are no women at the tour. We got to bring them back. And we'll get into that longer story in a bit. But what happened next was we did actually um, employ the activism tactics. And the next edition of Women at the Tour de France was called La Course by Tour de France. And it started in 2014 and it ran to 2021. And it was only 1 or 2 days. So it was almost like having to go all the way back to the drawing board to prove that women were fully capable of racing. And then finally in 2022, the 4th edition, known as Tour de France Femme, grew from La Course, and the women now race 8 days, which is great. I mean, yes, it's definitely progress from 1 day, but it is a far cry from the 18 to 21 days that the women used to have in the 80s. So there's been 4 editions of the Tour de France, and we are still pushing the boundaries for more. And yet, yeah, I probably almost died trying to even just bring it back for 1 day. So there's a lot of drama and history that got kind of caught up in really just wanting women to have access to the same events that men are capable of doing.
Yeah, my blood is boiling currently. And
Mm.
also when I was
Mhm.
watching your documentary, Half the Road, which everybody should see. I had a moment in that documentary when you were talking about the history of the tour, and it was just like kind of this light bulb moment where I had covered maybe 2 months ago. I don't know if you saw it. It's called Copa 71. It's about the Women's World Cup that nobody had ever heard of. And
Yeah.
took place in Mexico, and we covered it on the podcast. And it was an enormous success, right? And so what did
Mhm.
they do? FIFA banned it. FIFA banned
Yeah.
women's soccer. So when you were talking and based on the documentary that you did, it was like, okay, huge success in 1955. Okay, now let's ban it. And it's infuriating. And I just was like, I literally had to pause the documentary and be like, this happens in every sport and everything like it's just, and you could say this, of course, across, jobs and cultures and whatever. It's always like men trying to, put a lid on women's achievement. And it's this ultimate fear that we can do everything they can do and also give birth. And there you go. But the UCI role, this guy, Pat McQuaid, and then
Mhm.
Brian Cookson, who came up in the documentary, who basically, it felt like got thrown to the wolves, even though I did not like him at all. Um, it was such egregious discrimination. And
Yeah.
and when you were interviewing Brian Cookson, you know, UCI being is this correct? Like the governing
Yeah.
body of, yeah, it was, everyone has to see this documentary because he was just fumbling. You were like, well, why why isn't there a tour for women? Why is there, 1 day here? And he was just basically flat out saying women can't do it. They can't raise the
He actually
money.
did
Yeah,
say that.
yeah. He's like, women can't physically do it. And you're like,
Yep.
I can't. It was just, it was so, so crazy. So let's back up to this moment
Yeah.
because this activism part was so impressive to me because there's so many, women and men that face barriers and they go, well, no, it's not there. Women can't do it. Here's the huge organization saying, nope, there's no women's tour. And then I want you to talk to us about La Tour is Entier. Is that's what it's
I
called, right? The
I've
whole.
been told it's Le Tour Entier.
Okay, there we go. I don't want to brag. I took Spanish in 8th grade, and I
Me
think that's
too.
where I stopped. So
Yeah,
I think
that's
my
the extent
teachers
of my
encouraged
French
me.
too.
Okay, good. Um, but it was just this amazing moment where you banded together with 4 other women, and I want you to talk about these women are just like, absolute,
Yeah.
heroes. And to say no, we're gonna go and we're gonna force this to happen. And it's an incredible, incredible moment. And I know we just met, but to me, it's like heroic. I mean, what you did to propel women cycling forward is just incredible. So please tell us about that moment.
Oh, Erin, thank you. But really the incredible part is that we're talking about it. And that's where you have a direct hand in keeping this momentum moving forward because you're bringing me on. We're talking about the ongoing not just struggle, but the triumphs of cycling and of all sports. So thank you for doing what you do and putting women's sports forward. Like it's all part of this pattern of awesomeness of getting women where we need to be. So thank you. Okay.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
So, yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about Le Tour Entier and how we got that name. But it stems back to when I was looking for that Tour de France, where to go, why is it not here anymore? I started reaching out to ASO, the owners of the Tour de France, saying, hey, I have a business proposal, 20-page long business proposal on how bringing back women will actually benefit you financially as well as societal. It'll be a great thing to do. And had a huge proposal, and all I wanted to do was meet with ASO, sit down and talk about the structure of how to bring it back. And I heard crickets, not just once, but for basically 4 years straight. And during those 4 years, what happened was I was able to follow that trajectory that ESPN originally created through that assignment. And I actually got to the pro ranks, which was a miracle in many ways. There had been age requirements and limits. And by the time I got my first pro contract, I was 37 years old, and that's considered ancient, or it was considered ancient in women's cycling. Now it's considered very normal, but back then it was a big deal. And when I finally got back on contract, or finally got that first pro contract, and at this time also, I was hired by ESPN to serve in both a writing and an editorial role. So I'm like, okay, I've got journalism powers of ESPN behind me again, and I am a pro cyclist. I have the ability now to pitch a documentary, and I can actually sit down and interview other pro cycling women. And when I ran this idea past ESPN, they actually said, no, does anyone watch women's cycling? And I was like, no, they don't, because they don't have a way to see it.
Yeah.
But you're ESPN. We can change this dynamic. And, sometimes we have to remember that it's just one person at a company. And if they say no, then no means no. And that stinks. When that woman said no, something in my gut was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to make this film myself, which was the scariest thought I'd ever had because I didn't know how to make a film. I could maybe construct a sentence now and then, but to think of actually making a film, that's very different from writing and journalism. But I went on this path, and I stepped away from ESPN, and we being my filmmaking partner Kevin Tokstad and I made Half the Road. And the other big part of that is that we crowdfunded to make this film happen from 16 different countries, equal parts men and women across the board, that made Half the Road a success. And I think it's important for people to know that, because I wasn't famous, I wasn't wealthy, and if I was able to just build on the momentum of that women's sports was creating to make something happen, it proves that like we're all capable of doing anything. So in making Half the Road, this is where we circle back to Le Tour Entier. In making Half the Road, I got to sit down and interview the greats, the goats of my generation in pro cycling. One who is still the goat, Marianne Vos of the Netherlands. She is the winningest cyclist of all time, both on the men's and women's side. And when she said she wanted to do the Tour de France, I kind of made a mental note. And then I interviewed Emma Pooley of Great Britain. And she was the same way. I want to do the Tour de France. And then I also interviewed powerhouse world champion triathlete Chrissy Wellington. And she said, well, I don't technically want to do the Tour de France because I'm a triathlete, not a road cyclist, but I want to see a Tour de France for women. And that at that point, I knew I had some serious star power. And even though I was far from star power, I had the organizational skills to think, okay, you know what? These are the superstars. I'll drive the bus. Let's see how far we can go with this. And we formed what we called a pressure group, and we called it Le Tour Entier. That was Emma's idea. It in French means the whole tour. Like women belong at the whole tour, men, women, the whole tour. And she also, being fluent in French, was like, this is a good name if we're going to approach French people and French businesses. Let's sound French. was like, oh, that's brilliant.
Yes.
Okay. So Le Tour Entier, that is as much French as I speak. My last name is also French, Bertine. So I probably should speak more, but I took Spanish. Anyway, fast forward.
You've had a lot on your plate. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Thank you. I will put that on the list though.
Yeah.
Learn French. So that's what got us to bond together. And where we went from there was we created a petition, but it was more than just a change.org petition. I should also mention that in 2013, change.org was still on the news side. And it was not the easiest thing to sign petitions. You didn't just enter in an email and click, yes, I support this. It was a little bit more laborious to commit to a petition signature. And we knew that just launching a petition wouldn't be enough. We also had to have a clear manifesto of an objective and a meeting and sitting down with ASO to talk about what would happen. So all of this went into planning, and it took a lot of time and a lot of work. And we did this behind the scenes, and we decided in July of 2013 that we would launch this petition asking women to be, I should say, re-included to the Tour de France. And we thought we'd launch it during the men's Tour de France to see if it would maybe gain some traction. And what was amazing and what happened was it gained so much traction. It went viral for 2013 standards, and it ended up becoming one of change.org's top 3 most signed petitions of that year. We got almost 100,000 signatures, and that was huge back then. So all of this amazing stuff is happening. And what's really funny is that ASO was not responding. They felt annoyed by this petition. And that was great, because then the press was going after ASO saying, are you going to respond to this? Are you? You know, and publicly they were like, oh, that petition. But behind the scenes, they did get in touch with us and they said, we'd love to meet with you, but it has to be in private, it has to be secret. Can't tell anybody about this. And that made us all laugh a little, like, oh, okay, we won't tell 100,000 people,
Sure.
you know, right? I know it'd be so scary to sit down with a bunch of women at a table and have a discussion. You know, you have to find the humor in it. Otherwise, it would just drive you absolutely batshit crazy trying to make strides in the world.
No, every step of every leg of this journey, your like any woman's journey where you're like, if I don't laugh right now, I'm going to throw myself off the balcony. It's just, yeah, it's
pretty much,
it's incredible.
Yeah, you have to. That's the number one coping mechanism I tell anybody who wants to, you know, be an instigator or an advocate for change. Like, you got to find the humor, otherwise it will eat you alive. And so there were plenty of humorous moments. One of my favorites is that I remember putting on Twitter, once we finally got this meeting with ASO, I put something extremely generic, like, interesting things are happening. And ASO contacts me and they're like, take that down. Take that down. Remove that tweet. You cannot say that interesting things are happening today.
Oh, wow. Like, so much information revealed.
Yeah, I know.
Oh God, these it's just veiled fear on their end that women can accomplish something. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, no, it's a circus for sure.
Yeah.
So we eventually get this meeting, and it's in October of 2013. And of course, this petition, as you can imagine, was shooting for full inclusion of women at the event. And just to be, very clear, it's not that we wanted to race the men. We wanted to have a women's event and a men's event, but, at the same time, obviously not competing against each other. Two separate groups. But we had to explain that to the Twitter sphere, to everything, because you had so many people like, wait, you want the men and women to race each other? I'm like, no, just like all the other sports, two groups doing their
basic
thing.
Equality. Just basic equality.
Oh my gosh, rising tide lifts all boats. Why is that so hard?
Unreal.
So we finally get this meeting, and rather than going for the full inclusion right off the bat, ASO says, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you one day in 2014 because we just don't know if anyone will watch. And of course, the rest of us are like, of course they're going to watch. Fans of cycling don't care if it's men's or women's racing. It's equally exciting. They're going to watch. But the fact that we actually had to, accept that it was going to be one day when 30 or 25 years ago it had been 18 stages. And yet that had either been forgotten or buried by the current powers that be was crazy, right? So we're like, okay, we got our foot in the door. And the biggest achievement that came from that is this rendition, which would be the third running of the Tour de France for women, was called La Course by Tour de France. And the biggest victory was that we finally had the naming rights back for the Tour de France. It would be on the same course as the men were racing that day, which happened to be the final stage on the Champs-Élysées. The Arc de
You know
Triomphe.
more French. You know
I'm
more
totally
French.
fluent. There we go. I have 3 sentences or sentence fragments anyway. But that's what came of this was we finally got the naming rights back. We're going to the race. And well, when I say we're going to the race, that's collectively speaking. What it's always important to tell listeners and to tell fans of cycling was that does not mean that having women back at the Tour de France was a giant free for all of like, okay, all women can just go to the Tour de France. That is the pinnacle sport of cycling. And so, of course, there's going to be a qualification procedure for the teams. And we had a hand in building the race, building the team qualification structure, all of that. And we kept it as close to the men's that we could. So behind the scenes, we're doing all the work setting up this race. That the Tour Entier group is doing this work. And yet ASO won't name us, won't say anything about this. And somewhere in my head, that's when I was like, look, I don't need to be named for this, but someday the truth has to come out of how this all actually happened. And I'll write a great big book about it, But we were definitely silenced and kept behind the scenes, much like the film Hidden Figures, and the mathematicians of NASA, the women who were not given any credit, right? This is an unfortunate trend is women are often buried in history. So we're like, okay, well, we know this is happening, but we'll get it out there in the future. And on the personal side, which was crazy, was the pro cycling team that I had raced for in the previous 2 years had a director that just did not like that I got some media attention for standing up for women's rights. And rather than embrace it and stand behind it and be part of it and be like, yeah, you go get this done for women, it was the opposite. And she was like, you got to stop talking about this equality. You just got to smile and wave. And, that wasn't a direct quote, but the idea of being like, just smile and wave and look pretty. And that's all we need in women's sports,
Oh my God. Coming from a woman?
Coming
Isn't
from a woman, that was the
that's
worst
always the
part.
worst. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
worst. If it had been a guy, I probably could have laughed and just shrugged it off. But to have it be a woman, not just a woman, but somebody I looked up to, who was now directing. But in my day, when she was racing, she was someone I looked up to. So it was just the most odd, awkward, and unfortunate kind of slap in the face to have a woman try to hold us back from progress. And it got to the point where she said, if you don't stop talking about this equality stuff, I will bench you for the rest of the year. And she did. And then when the decision came to re-sign for 2014, she totally dropped me from the team. And I went into 2014, without a team. And she had timed it as such so that when all teams were being re-signed, that was kind of my window to try to get a new contract. And I didn't, because she had waited too long for me to, put my name in the hat for other teams. So I start 2014 without a team, and I had basically gotten dropped from that one for being a rabble rouser. And to condense the story, what I never expected, but was so happy, was that in June, so about a month before La Course by Tour de France would happen, I was picked up by a team that was ranked 8th in the world. And the reason I got dropped for being a rabble rouser, they saw that as a bonus. They said, we want you on this team. You're part of the reason that La Course by Tour de France is happening. We want you there. You've got the skills. We're going to bring you on. And so I actually got to stand on the start line of my dreams in 2014.
Oh my God. That's so awesome. Geez, I cannot believe you do all this to benefit women and women's cycling. And then that idiot drops you from the team. I
Oh,
name names, give us addresses. I've got a lesbian army behind me. Let's do this.
yes, yes, sister.
Let's take
I
out
love
this
it.
lady immediately. I think
Right. And you know,
sometimes, yeah, you just meet women that are like so beaten down, like
yes.
they're all they know is they're so fearful of using their own voice. They've gotten this much ahead, and they're holding onto it for dear life. And that's what makes your story. And Marianne and Emma and Chrissy Wellington, my new obsession, by the way, we'll get to that.
Yes.
Uh so someone has to take the flag. Someone has to stand up and be like, this is what we have to do. But
Yeah.
it is actually, it is disappointing, when you meet another. I naturally assume all women have to, like, we're banding together, but
Yeah.
it's always not, obviously always the case. But what a moment. Let me just circle back
Mm,
real quick. When you're in that meeting with ASO, like,
mhm.
did you feel like, obviously they gave you one day, which is something, but
Yeah.
did you kind of have to step away from that meeting and gather and go, should we take this? Do we push for more? Like, what was the sort of dialogue between you four?
Great question. Great question. What we told them, we said, okay, we're actually super impressed that they were ready in that October of 2013 to put women in the tour in basically 7 months from that, 7 or 8 months. So we're like, wow, we would rather have one day and get our foot in the door than a promise for,
Mm.
18 to 21 stages, but not until 10 years. It made sense to say, okay, foot in the door. But we also told them, we said, listen, if this is going to work, then you need to add 3 to 5 days each year after this initial first year. And you add those days so that the race grows and so that the teams and the budget of women's cycling can grow along with it. And of course, we're, yes, yes, of course, of course. So the fact that at the end of the first La Course by Tour de France, you know what their reaction was? It was so reactionary. So all the numbers and the data came in. It was screened by something like, or I should say, not streamed, but that back then it was really, TV was
Yeah.
your main way of seeing stuff, but there was still streaming that was happening, and it was seen by 153 countries on, 20 or 30 different broadcast stations worldwide. So it was amazing that all the data was coming in, that people were watching, people were tuning in. All the sponsors were happy with the exposure that they were getting. So we were expecting ASO to say, okay, that was a great one day. Next year we'll have 4 days, and then build upward from there. But they didn't keep their promise, and their reactionary reaction was to just do one day again the next year. And we all said, wait, that doesn't make any sense. We just proved
Yeah.
the visibility works. So let's grow from there. But it was really after that, it was the third year that people started getting pretty grumpy. Like, hold on, you can't keep doing this one day thing. Only it took 8 years of pushing and press to finally make that happen. But I'm going to circle back to your comment of like, what was it like that day, in the meeting room with
Yeah.
them, and just facing these really antiquated guys. I thought we were going to step into a meeting room of, octogenarians and just, silver haired old
Yeah.
guys with ears full of hair, that were just antiquated.
Can
So what
women
was
ride bikes?
did their petticoats get in the way? No, it was the opposite. It was almost like these guys were between the ages of I would say late 40s to early 60s. So they were very much young enough to be part of what we were hoping was the change, of this dynamic. So we were just really met face to face with some crazy stuff. For one, I brought a recorder to the meeting because, being a writer, I wanted to make sure I got all the facts straight and had a detailed log of it. And they took the recorder away. They're like, no, you can't record any of this. To which I took out a pen and piece of paper and proceeded anyway. But that was part of it. And then they started the meeting. This is what I call in the book, Stand, I call this the great finger wag. But they started the meeting by saying, you should not have created that petition. And in the back of my head, I'm like, well, maybe if you had answered my 4 years of emailing you, we wouldn't have needed to, you know, but so they started the meeting by scolding us, like with an actual finger wag.
I I want to slap all of these guys. So like I can't. This is like, but when you think about it, like, I'm just getting in real time, I'm thinking about Venus Williams going
Yeah,
into, the meeting of the Grand Slams and demanding equal money. Like, this is it. It's you four women going in and facing this gross corporation, filled with misogyny and standing up for it and
yeah,
dealing with these like condescending finger wags. Like even in the
yeah,
documentary, like I'm not sure what the cyclist's name was. There were so many, and I was trying to take so many notes. But one of the tour guys saying, if you're menstruating, you're not gonna be
yeah,
allowed in the race. And I'm like, and this is like
yeah,
80s, 90s, and I'm going, oh my God, it's
yeah,
just moment after moment. But what an incredible moment to have. Like you are responsible for literally getting women's cycling on the map and getting this tour back, and which is an unreal feat. But let me just ask
well,
you this:
it's
as an athlete, right?
yeah,
You Now it's 2014. Now your dream of having the Tour de France is like happening. It's one day.
hmm
You have to
hmm
wear like, the business suit on one hand and then, your cycling jersey on the other hand.
yeah.
How do you flip into like competitive mode? Like that moment is pretty incredible to think about. You're on the starting line, but now you're like, okay, I just did this, but now I have to compete.
Ah,
That's a moment.
yeah, there were a lot of hats that were worn during that time for sure. But I think that there is something kind of natural and intrinsic to most athletes, regardless of whether you're a superpower superhero or you're just a very competitive natured athlete. There is something that when it's time to put on game face and it's game day, um, if you've done sport for long enough, you can flip that switch in a good way and be like, okay, we're at the start line. I just got to ride, you know. So that part was good, and I was able to be there and be present at the race. But at the same time, the personal effect it was taking on me, which
Mm.
I go into detail about in the book, and I'll make a very short story for you here. But my personal life had totally fallen apart. 2 months before La Course by Tour de France, my husband left, and it was very sudden, and he had just walked out and wanted no more contact. I think the journey of this had just been too much, and so I'm in this very very vulnerable place where I have to watch, or not, excuse me, where I have to stand on these front lines of change and be the voice in the media and celebrate the glory of women cycling. But then behind the scenes I was absolutely a mess and I was falling apart, and it really took a big hit on my mental health, to the point where a couple weeks after the Tour de France Femme, I didn't, or excuse me, a couple weeks after the 2014 La Course by Tour de France, I just didn't want to be around anymore, and came very, very close to ending it all. And that was not something that I expected for stepping into the role of an activist. I thought that fighting for something that seemed so very second nature, just all we wanted was women to have the same opportunities available to them as the men. And I had no idea how much backlash and how much pain would be involved with that on a personal level. And I tell I tell anyone now these days who want to get into creating change that it's absolutely worth the journey, but you've got to surround yourself with people who believe in you, and especially like the Tour Entier, our core group there. Um, I always say that this is a we thing. I might have been the organizer to get it going and get it off the ground, but it wouldn't have happened if I had tried to do this alone. It had to happen with others. It had to happen with the right group of people who kind of have your back, and that made a big difference in the journey. So I
Holy
played a
crap.
role, but it wasn't
Wow.
just me.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm so sorry
there's a
that
lot to
you, well,
digest.
I've literally, I'm ordering the book. There was just so much
Mm.
to cover before. So I'm like, everybody, I will put all your links to everything you've ever done in the show notes. So that is clear. And I'm going to order this book, but I'm so sorry that you went through this. Kathryn, here's the
Mm.
bigger question. How many
Yeah.
men do I have to kill? Now
Oh,
we've got your ex-husband, we've got all of the French delegates. I'm, or at least maybe I don't think I can really kill anyone, but I can I'm gonna have some we're gonna have a private conversation of how many men that I have to make their lives a complete and utter hell. Holy shit.
uh,
Yeah. I mean,
thank
I
you for
can't
the
even imagine.
solidarity.
Well, I mean, please.
No.
We're lifelong friends now, and I will
Yay.
somehow get on a bike one of these days, but we'll get to that.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Okay, so let's cut to I mean, there's just so much, but let's bring listeners up to speed of
Yep.
now 2022, 23, 24. It keeps growing. Now I guess some people have realized, well, women can stay on a bike more than a couple of hours. And now we're up to what, 8 to 9 stages now? God, the progress
Nine
is
stages.
amazing, but slow. Yeah.
I know it goes to 9 stages next year, which is exciting in terms of the growth factor, but it's funny too because the joke is like, oh, this is great. We will have all 21 stages at the Tour de France by, 2057.
It just Do you really think
Like,
it's going to be like one stage a year, or do you think at some point, just with the
uh,
growth of women's sports as a whole? And I always say this every podcast:
yeah.
the WNBA hopefully is the gateway drug, and then you can be like, oh, there's other things going on. But it does feel like this big groundswell. Do you think that's gonna speed up the stages of women's cycling?
My eternal optimist is always going to believe that, yes, of course, this can happen, thanks to the women in the 80s who proved that it already did happen. Of course,
Yeah.
we are capable. It's definitely, definitely possible. I think what we need most right now is that visionary who also comes with millions of dollars to say, hey, listen, those 8 and 9 stage years were fantastic. I'm going to double it with a
Mm.
promise to triple it, by X date. And I think that's going to make the biggest difference, because one thing to really know in this story is that ASO themselves, they're on the lazy spectrum. They had the ability to put in as many days or to put in equal prize money. They have the ability to do that, but they're not doing it because of the apathy, the sexism, the laziness. So what we need is that sponsor to come through saying, look, this has been done before. I want my name attached to the progress of doing it again. And here's X amount of dollars. And it's not going to be one stage per year. It's going to be at least 2 weeks by next year.
Yeah.
That's the kind of progress we need. And when I say at least two, one thing I always like to joke about is a lot of people think that, oh, equality means always elevating the women to what the men's standard is. And I think one thing that is very interesting about cycling is that these stages that are a little bit shorter in distance and a little bit shorter in days are actually more exciting than the 3 week drawn out long stages, long hours of the men's tour. So I always laugh and say, hey, listen, we don't necessarily need to do 3 weeks to be equal to men. How about if you bring the men and the women to a 2 week forum with shorter but punchier stages, make for more exciting races, makes for more exciting fandom. They're going to want to watch this more. So equality doesn't always have to mean that we're constantly striving upward. Maybe it means adjusting what was up there, to a level that would be more exciting for all the fans. So, I'm always like, well,
Yeah.
let's just get a 2 week Tour de France and and
Yeah.
take it from there. But of course, then people are like, no, 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 tradition, tradition.
You're
And I'm
just
like, yeah,
always
they're
up against something, right? You're like, let's
always,
make it tweak and more
always.
exciting. Oh, there's just always,
Yeah,
my God, there's always something. Okay, let's
yeah.
just talk about I'm hooked. And I wish we had this conversation literally years ago, but we're having it right now.
Mhm.
I have going to go back and watch some replays. I didn't watch enough for Olympic cycling. And then I
Mm.
literally, just because I was like, wait, we sort of met on Twitter, the only good thing
Yeah.
about Twitter. Um,
Yes.
and I'm like, I guess I'll keep it. But so, I watched some of the women's site. I've never literally watched it before. I've just never
Yeah.
really watched cycling in general.
Yeah.
So I was just like, wait, the stages, the jersey. I just want to just give us a little,
Yeah.
just some of these rules so I can understand it better. And then I want to get to like, okay, now I've got the bug. How do I watch? When do I watch? But the jerseys and the classifications are
Yes.
very kind of hard to wrap my head around.
I get it, because when I first looked into this, I was like, how does this all work? I don't know
Yeah.
either. And but all it takes is somebody who's in the cycling circles to give a quick explanation. I think it's easier to get people hooked this way. So what's interesting about the Tour de France is it's called a stage race, which means every day is a stage, and you have to complete stage one to get to stage two, to get to stage three, etc. Right? So it's not like in one of these long races you can ever take a day off in between and come back the next day. It doesn't work like that. It's an elimination process. If you are sick or injured or ill, you're out and you don't get to rejoin. So it makes for a very grueling event. Now, to talk a little bit about the rules, here's what's fun. Cycling is actually a team sport. And on the men's side, it's usually 8 riders per team, and on the women's 6, because of course, what would we do with 8?
So
That's a
fragile.
joke. It's so fragile. So fragile. But what was cool about this year's Tour de France, they had 7 women per team. And I was like, ooh, we're almost there. Right? Now we'll add a body part per year, and we should get there again by 2050. But so keep in mind, let's talk about the number 7, right? So there are 7 riders on the teams that just went through the Tour de France Femme. And each of these riders, they actually have a different role. Climbers, that's one role. Somebody who's really, really good and talented on mountain stages. Then you have sprinters who are very, very powerful. The fast twitch fiber muscles. They're excellent at sprinting. And then you have roles called the domestiques, which is a French word for the servant. And what the domestiques do is they keep the sprinters or the climbers out of the wind. Actually, on the roads, they surround them, keep them out of the wind, and they have other roles on that day to make sure that the protected rider who's targeting the win of their team that day is safe and has all their energy ready to be dispersed at whatever stage is in their favor that day. So there are all sorts of interesting aspects. Now I'll give you an example of what makes it fun. One of the domestiques might sprint up the road, which means that the racers and the domestiques from all the other teams then have to go sprint after her because they don't want her to win, right? And they tire each other out so that the leaders can wait and pounce at the right moment
Oh
to
my God, this is
yeah.
this is what I was watching. I didn't even know I was like I just was just like, "Oh my God, this is exciting," but I didn't even know what I was watching. Wait, that's
Yes.
fascinating.
So it's sometimes the job of a domestique, and I keep using this term because I was a domestique. So there were plenty of races where my job was to go sit on the front of the group, and that we call that group a peloton, which is not just one singular exercise bike, but it's actually a group of people, right? So to sit, at the front of the peloton and be in the wind and drive the pace for as hard as you can, and then when you were exhausted from that effort, it was not uncommon to like go to the back and then kind of fall away and yes, finish the race, but be totally out of contention because you had done your job of driving the pace as hard as you possibly can to tire all the others out, right?
Okay.
So
Okay. I have all right, just one quick question.
yeah, yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
so how do you choose who like it seems like if there's
You
7,
don't.
like how do you know who's the
Yeah,
domestique and
right.
who's the one that's like I want to win it
That
all?
that's all discussed way well before the race even starts, and it comes down to this interesting physiology of different athletes who are suited to different courses, who have certain engines, endurance engines or sprint engines, and that's all decided and discussed before the tour even starts. And even actually before your season starts, if you're hired onto a team, it's usually to be in this role, where they want a climber to be in tip-top perfect condition in July or in August, or and you and your coach develop your training plan around what your job is for that team. So it's really interesting to see, that there are so many roles that can be filled. And to bring it back to when we're actually watching, the Tour de France has what many people might recognize as the leader's jersey, and that's yellow. It's bright yellow. And the person who wins the first stage will wear the yellow jersey. And then what her goal is for stage 2 is to obviously keep that yellow jersey. But what happens each day is if the yellow jersey rider is beaten, then if that time gap is such that, she's beaten so much, then the jersey transfers to the next person or to the next person. And the accumulated least amount of time is the person who wins the Tour de France in the end. So we talked about the climbers that are out there shining their light on the mountain stages, the sprinters who are winning points at different sprint stages that are throughout the day. It's wild. So like sprinters might go to win like at the 25-yard line. And then they have to hang in for the rest of the race and and claim their jersey at the end of the day. So it's really cool. It's like chess. Different players have different roles or can move in different directions. And at the end of the day, the person with the least time wins. So it's a really cool thing to sit and watch and then learn. And it can be very exciting. So I'm going to bring it back to what just happened at the Tour de France Femme last week. And what was amazing is this was an 8-day race. And if you total all the hours put on the bike, it was over 24 hours, in total. But it all came down to 4 seconds that the winner won the entire 8 days by just 4 seconds. And her ability to not give up, even though she'd been dropped from the peloton and then new leaders were surging, she had to dig so deep and see how close to that time barrier, she could get without losing the jersey. And when she crossed the line, she didn't even know that she had won because they had to wait for the time calculations of everything to come through.
That moment was, I saw that moment when she was sprinting and he's like, she has 4 set. Like it was, I was like absolutely riveted and I didn't even know the rules. And I just was like, I don't know exactly what's happening, but she is like, after all the racing, she's in a full sprint to clock the time. And I was like, I'm in. Like I literally was like, I'm
crazy?
in. And then I learned about the polka dot jersey. That's the climbing stage.
The polka dot jersey is the climbing stage. And the whole thing with the polka dots actually stems back to the early 1900s when a candy company that had a polka dot wrapper sponsored the race. And they're like, we'll sponsor the mountain stages. And that polka dot theme just kept, for the last 124 years. The green jersey, I'm not sure why it's green, but it's always been green. That's for the sprinters. Then there's a best young riders jersey, and that's white. I think they should have a best old riders jersey that should be gray. That has not yet been included, but I'm pushing for it.
Yeah.
And and then of course the yellow jersey, and then there's a team jersey or even team helmet for the team that has the fastest riders accumulated in time. So it's really cool to know that there are races going on within the race of
it's total Russian
racing.
doll. It is. It's so that's what I'm learning. And I was like, okay, now I want to go back now that I sort of know what's happening. It's going to be a journey. But let me just ask you this. I know we have to wrap it up soon, but is there a team, just to understand this, is there a team winner? Or I know there's obviously the individual winner of Tour de France, but also a team winner?
There is an actual team classification at the end. And this is where I'm embarrassed. I'm going to have to go back and check to see which team, because it changed each day as to which
I know
team
Netherlands
was in the lead.
were like, she won from the Netherlands, but now that you're saying team, okay. So it's usually just the photo of the top 3, obviously on the podium. But
but if you think about it, I don't know if this actually is equated to cross country running. Like your team would win, and I used to run cross country back in high school, but your team would win based on the accumulated time of 5 out of 7 runners, right? So the same thing in cycling. The team that wins is the team that has all 7 riders across the line first before the other teams. And
Okay.
that there's a very powerful team, that's out there. I take that back. There are so many powerful teams, and this is what's awesome to see. There's not just one team that's going to win out every single race, nor is there one country that's going to always have, the winner. And what was so cool about Kasia Niewiadoma, who just won the Tour de France Femme, she's Polish, and it was
That's right.
so cool to see that, we've got Dutch, Polish, US, plenty of other European, Australian, there is just a rainbow of flags now at the end of the tour, and it's really great to see. And of course, the Dutch and Belgians have such a long tradition in cycling. They always have strong athletes, but to see that the rest of the world has caught up to them in terms of athletes, female athletes, has been amazing. So I love that. Progress
Yeah.
is here. It's thriving.
If we're hooked now, I'm hooked. All the
Mm-hmm.
listeners are going to be hooked, and there's obviously a huge world that's already hooked. Where's like, where can we find the next race, or like, what do you recommend of like,
Right.
we just came off the tour, we just came by the Olympics to keep the momentum going.
Yep.
What's the best place to go?
So for all of your listeners who are US based, the 2 sites to go to are Peacock Sports, which is an affiliate of NBC. And a lot of people know of Peacock from watching the Olympics. You could get, a lot of detail from Peacock in terms of what's coming next for cycling. The other one is Flow Sports, FLO Sports, and they have a cycling calendar too. So if you subscribe to either of these, they will alert you what upcoming races are happening. And I love that. Like, that's great that we can now live stream the sports that we're most passionate about. But of course, I'm always going to feel like, hey, this is the stuff that needs to be mainstreamed too.
Oh,
Not
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
not like we have to go searching and hunting. And for example, like if you live in Europe, Eurosport just has this on all the time. The way that, when we turn on ESPN or any of the other major sports networks and you get the daily rundown of, the big 6 sports, you get cycling over there. You get cycling in Australia, you get cycling, in a lot of Asian countries as well, without having to search for it. It's just there. So we have a bit of work to do with that in
Yeah.
the States, but we're getting closer.
Getting close. We absolutely are getting. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's like one feeds the next thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, get
Yeah.
the sponsorship, TV, like it's coming along. It's just the progress for literally women doing anything is, it's at a snail's pace. Okay, let's end with
Yes.
this. You have an
Okay.
incredible foundation that I want everybody to know about, donate, talk to us about the
Aw.
Homestretch Foundation.
I'd love to. Yeah, Homestretch Foundation actually was formed from something that I needed and would have loved to have had during my days in professional cycling. There is still a pay gap that's happening at the professional level. Go figure, imagine that. But to keep it very simple, the men's side of the sport at the World Tour, the very top, has a base salary for all athletes that are signed to the World Tour. But for the women, it's still lower than the men's. And then for the minor leagues, the men have a base salary and the women have zero base salary. So where this creates a lot of havoc is that athletes who are at the tippy top on the women's side often need to have 1 or even 2 part-time jobs, or financially supportive family members, right? So if they don't have either of these, their path is pretty limited in cycling. So what we do at Homestretch, which is based in Tucson, Arizona, which happens to be a cycling mecca for those who are in road cycling because of our climate and our topography. This is why we're based here. What we do is we have a home that we provide for the Pro Continental and World Tour women, the top of the top, and also some of the up and coming athletes. They can apply to live there for free. So they don't have to pay rent, they don't have to pay utilities. They do have to fund their grocery bill because in this day and age, everybody eats very differently from everyone else. So that's their only expense. But what is great about Homestretch is it gives them an actual foothold so they can go to their races, go to their teams, do their training plan, but not have to worry about the day-to-day expenses that usually pop up. We have been around for 9 years. We have been able to help, was it 97 athletes from 18 different countries 7 Olympians have come through our program, which we love.
Wow.
And we'll start our 10th year this coming November. That's the season kind of starts November, December. And we are kept alive by donations from people who believe that women in pro sports should absolutely have an equal foothold to get to the next level. And everything that you can wish to learn about Homestretch is at homestretchfoundation.org. And we are excited to keep it going. And it's a real feel good process for me, to see these athletes thriving and to play the tiniest role in just their ability to get from step 1 to step 2 has been a real blessing for me to watch that happen.
Wow, that's incredible. I will link everything in the show notes. I'm just literally listening to you and being like, is someone sewing you a cape? I'm not sure if there's any woman that's done more for women's cycling. It's just incredible. I'm just really blown away by what you've accomplished in your life and just elevating the sport and elevating women and continuing to do this with your foundation. You're just, I'm going to swear, fucking impressive. And I'm just thrilled by our conversation. Thank you so much
Erin,
for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I gotta make sure that people know that, it isn't just me. It's the women who paved the way, before me, that were the inspiration for me to be like, okay, they made all of this progress. What can I do to just keep the progress moving forward? So my biggest hope is that the women of today's current generation, the ones who are out there racing, standing on the start lines, also will put on that hat to stand on the front lines of change and take it one step further. And that's what kind of keeps me going through it all.
I mean, how inspiring is Kathryn? Holy crap. Her level of skill on the bike matched with her incredible activism off the bike is unparalleled. The world of cycling is so lucky to have her, and I'm just super grateful that I got to share her story. And of course, I gained a new sport to obsess over, which is so fun. I mean, probably unnecessary given the 780 things I watched, but I'm all in with cycling. Okay, people, we've reached that time of the show. It's the feel-good moment of the week. We're staying in the world of women's cycling to celebrate the feel-goodness of Kristen Faulkner. What she's done in the past month is incredible. Okay, let's start with the Olympics, which was her dream as a little kid. She just became the first U.S. woman to win Olympic gold in 2 different cycling disciplines, the road race and the team pursuit, which is mind-blowing because she started racing in 2016 after taking a free clinic in Central Park, then doesn't start track cycling until 2019, and then doesn't go full time until 2020. That is only 4 years ago. Oh, and she also graduated from Harvard and she was an investment banker. No big deal. Okay, so she crushes it in the Olympics, and then 10 days later, she competes in the Tour de France Femme. That's 8 days of grueling racing right after she completed the Olympics. And at the end, she was the best American rider in the race. I mean, she is just getting started, so buckle up. So awesome and so feel good. And that is our show, everyone. Please take a minute to subscribe to the podcast. Give it 5 stars if you want, but you should, because I love it and I hope you do. And leave a review. It's so helpful and I really appreciate it. Fans, friends, family, have the best week of your life.